Hello, this is John Miares with the USDA NASS Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this video, I want to take a little time to review some of the key features from the Vegetable Chemical Use Survey's CAPI instrument that are going to be different from what you might have already seen in the ARMS Phase 2 instrument. If you have not had a chance to explore what this instrument has in store for it, you should take some time to open up CAPI training and at least enter one of the practice exercises so that you can be familiar with some of the quirks and twists that this particular instrument has in store for it. So I want to emphasize that I'm not going to go over every single screen in this CAPI instrument. I've already gone through and created a 40-minute video going over the ARMS Phase 2 CAPI instrument, and many of the features in that instrument are the same as what is here. So if you want a chance to take a look at that video to see how things are supposed to work there, I would strongly recommend doing that. Here, I'm just going to really focus on what is different between the ARMS 2 instrument and the VegChem instrument. Now, I do want to say that I am recording this on a laptop computer, partly because it'll look a lot cleaner than if I do the recording on an iPad, and partly because the system that I have will be much easier if I do this recording on the laptop. So, what I would recommend, again, in order to make sure you have enough space both on your iPad or even on the computer to enter and see all the columns of data that are necessary, is to click on this hamburger over here in order to get your screen as wide as possible and get as much real estate in front of you as you can. Just as with the ARMS Phase 2 survey, you're going to have this consent question at the beginning that has to be answered in order to be able to enter data. Again, this question is tied specifically to whether or not a respondent has given permission for us to contact a custom sprayer to be able to collect and enter information. However, even if there is no custom sprayer involved, then we still need to say yes on this if we want to enter data into the system. So I'm going to click yes, and we will continue. We'll enter our beginning time, military time, and then again, page 2 of the questionnaire sets up a little bit differently. Has there been a change in the operator? We'll say no. If we say yes, then it's going to open up the questions allowing us to determine who the new operator is going to be. Has the operation printed on the questionnaire been combined or merged with any other farming operations? If we say yes, then it's going to end up skipping to the end of the survey. But if we say no, then we can continue. Now, I'm using a Michigan form just because it has more target crops, and for some of the features that we're going to be working with here, that is going to be more advantageous for us. But the properties you're going to see here are going to be very similar no matter what state you're working with. So we will say, yes, they grew some of the crops. And for now, I'm going to just say that this was an individual operation because I don't want to have to deal with the partner screens right now. And here we are entering this information just as you would see on a regular quarterly ag survey. I'll just say they own 500, they rent 500, they're not renting anything out. They have 1,000 acres total, 950 acres is cropland, and we'll say 400 acres is to vegetables, target and non-target crops. From here, we're going to have this pick list that will allow us to pick which vegetables we're working with. Now, in Michigan, there are 5 possible vegetables here: asparagus, snap beans, cucumbers, pumpkins, and squash. In Ohio, it's pumpkins and bell peppers. In Indiana, it's pumpkins and watermelons. So we can specify here, I could say, let's say there's 80 acres of asparagus, there's 50 acres of snap beans, and we'll say there's 100 acres of pumpkins. Now, I want to point out a couple of features here. Number one, let's say I say there were no pesticides applied to any of these crops. If I say no, 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 and then go down to the bottom and skip to the next screen, what you're going to notice is it will still ask me how many pesticide applications have been made for each of the 5 crops. Now, according to this, I didn't even grow any cucumbers or any squash on this operation, but it's still going to ask me this. You will want to enter a number in here for these values, even if that number is 0. Now, let's say we just say, all right, I'm going to put in 0 for every application number. Oops. Go back and enter 0 in there. And if I hit next, then it will skip over the section D table and assume that you don't have any chemicals that are going to get applied. Now, if I want to make sure I have some things entered in here, I can change these numbers to what I want. I can say that I have 2 applications to asparagus, I have 3 applications to pumpkins, and I have 1 application to snap beans. And it will open up 6 lines for me. Now, that is even though, if I back up a couple screens, you'll notice I put no, no, no here. There is no connection between what I enter on this screen here in terms of whether or not herbicides, insecticides, or fungicides were applied to that particular crop, and whether or not on this next screen I'll be asked how many chemicals were applied to each crop. Nor is there a check to say on the next screen that I couldn't possibly select cucumbers or squash here. So it's going to let me put anything I want for a crop. It'll even let me put anything I want for numbers of applications on this previous screen. As long as the total number of applications to all crops is accounted for, it doesn't really matter what we have in here. Obviously, it would be nice if it's going to be consistent, but on the paper questionnaire, you're just asked essentially for how many lines are in the pesticide table, not how many lines are tied to each particular crop. So you can certainly, and this will be good tracking for you, put the numbers here that are reported on the paper form. But when we go to the next screen, keep in mind that even if I said I just have pumpkins, you're going to need to specify that it's pumpkins as your primary crop. All right, so there's a few other things that I want to point out about the section D table. What you're going to notice here is that the number of lines that are opened up in the table are going to be tied back to the number of applications associated with each crop. The CAPI instrument does not make for any allowance for there to be a pesticide supplement. So if on paper you are having to record more than 33 lines of pesticides and need to use a paper supplement, you will not be indicating that here in the CAPI instrument. What you will end up doing is typing in however many total applications there were to the crop. So I could say there were 20 applications made to the asparagus crop, there were 13 applications to the pumpkin crop, and 10 applications to the snap bean crop, for a total of 43 pesticide applications. When I go to the next screen, what you're going to see here is that it will open up 43 lines for you to be able to enter all of the chemicals. The CAPI instrument is set up to be able to handle up to 300 lines for pesticide applications. So as long as you are under that, we should be in good shape. Now, looking at historic data for this survey going back several years, what we should see is that the use of pesticide supplements is pretty rare. I think we used maybe 14 total for the entire region for the 2018 version of this survey. So you're not going to have too many of these where you're going to have more than 33 applications. If you do, we're just going to add them all and treat this as one giant table. If you do run into an extremely large vegetable operation, and it does look like we're going to have more than 300 applications of pesticides here, then you're going to need to contact the office, and we're going to need to figure out a plan to get that data into the system. It may even need to be manually keyed. Now, if I'm looking at a demonstration example, obviously I don't want to be having something with 43 different lines of chemicals, so I'm going to back up, and I'm actually going to change the numbers that I have here to match the number of applications that are in Michigan's example 1. So we did not have any applications to asparagus. We have no cucumbers either. We're going to say that I have pesticide applications for pumpkins is going to be 3. Snap beans is going to be 2. And squash I had was 1. Now, ironically, the instrument is not going to require me to go back and change my numbers in section B where I told it how many acres of each target crop, and I already told it I was growing asparagus and snap beans and pumpkins and that I wasn't growing cucumbers and squash. It doesn't matter as far as the way this instrument doesn't care. It's not as smart an instrument as it should be. For your sake, you want to make sure that you're entering in everything into Capi as consistent as possible with what you have entered on the paper form, because if there are inconsistencies, we may need to make some phone calls. So I'm just going to show a couple of key features here. This is just like what we did here in the ARMS 2 instrument, where you can click on that little blue screen, that little blue square, and I will say, here's Kerbit. It'll put the right code, and I'll say the Kerbit was applied to pumpkins, but it was not part of a tank mix. And then I'll say I also applied Kerbit to my squash crop. And I can then do the pick down for squash. And it was not part of a tank mix. And then I'll have my snap beans. We had dual magnum. I will say it's going to be this one. And that one was part of a tank mix, so I'll put that on line 3. And then the 4th line is something called eptum. So I'll put that in here as eptum. Select. And put that as snap beans. And put that as line 3. I'm not going to put in the next 2 lines here just for time's sake, but I want to point out on the next screen, it's going to give me everything that was on the left-hand side. This has been the material that's on the one half of the chemical application page. This is what's on the other half of the chemical application page. The chemical product name is carried forward, but the crop name is not. So you do need to be mindful that when I was on the previous screen, I was applying Kerbit to my pumpkins on the top line and to my squash crop on the second line. So you do not want to lose track of what you have here when you're going from page 8 to page 9. So fortunately, we have the same application rate. It's going to be 1 quart per acre in both cases. However, the number of acres that were treated is going to be different. So I have 50 acres that were treated for pumpkins and 15 acres that were treated for on the squash. And everything was applied once, so I'll just leave that there. So the next section I want to spend some time looking at is section E1. Most of what's left in section E is pretty straightforward, but section E1 has a few things you're going to need to pay special attention to. Of course, on the vegetable chemical use survey, the first question at the top of section E1 asks which of the target crops is your primary target crop. So we'll have to go and do a pick. Let's say it's going to be pumpkins. Now, this section here is supposed to work the same way as it does on ARMS 2, where it asks, were any of the following pesticide spray practices or activities used on this operation for, and it'll say the crop name up here, pumpkins, in 2020. Pesticides include yada, yada, yada. And then you'll have the choices where there'll be yes, no, or don't know. And if we say yes, it will ask what would be in columns 2 and 3. Was it specifically used to keep pesticide applications on target, and how easy was it to do this practice? If we said no, then we're going to have these extra questions of why wasn't this used? Whereas with a don't know, when I click that on, I'm going to see the same choices that I had when I clicked on yes. We have alerted headquarters to this problem. At this point, it is not certain whether they are going to change this or not. If you put a don't know in here, please do not enter anything into part A and part B here. Those column entries need to be blank if you say don't know for any of these particular choices. And then again, just like in ARMS, this is going to be having an accordion pattern where things are going to only open up or close up when you hit that little plus sign. So again, yes, we're going to answer the questions there. Those are associated with columns 2 and 3 in that table. If I say no, then we'll answer the question tied to why we weren't using it. And if there's an other reason, we can check that and enter in the text box to please specify. And if the answer is don't know, please leave these blank. The next place where you're going to have to start paying extra special attention in the CAPI instrument is in question 4 and then in question 5 of section E1. Let's switch over to the paper form so you can take a look and we'll remind you what we have here. So on the paper form, question 4 is asking about pre-emergent pesticide applications, and they want to know which ones might have been made by air blast or air-assisted sprayers, those made by ground boom sprayers, or if you did not make pre-emergent pesticide applications at all. And then whichever one you did, or if you did both, we would fill out the appropriate column. On question 5, which is on the next 2 pages down here, it asks information about post-emergent pesticide applications, where in your first column, we can put information about the air blast or air-assisted spray systems. In the second column, we have the information you can record about the ground boom systems. Or then here, you can say, I didn't make post-emergent pesticide applications, and then we'd skip to item 6. In the CAPI instrument, these are not put together in columns. These are actually going to be put as separate screens. So the first screen is going to look like question 4. It's going to ask, did this operation make any pre-emergent pesticide applications using air blast or air-assisted sprayers? And if we say no, we can go on to the next screen. If I say yes, it will open up all of the questions that are here. But it will not, within the wording of each question, clarify that what I'm interested in here is information about the air blast sprayers. It will be up to you to make sure that you're paying particular attention when you enter the data in here to remember that, yes, all of the questions on this screen are tied to the air blast sprayers, and that's specific to what you're going to see here at the very top. And of course, if you didn't have any air blast applications, then you would just hit no and we could skip to the next screen. And then the next screen, it says it's question 5. It's really not question 5 on the paper form. It's really the second column of question 4. And this is where it's asking, did the operation make any pre-emergent pesticide applications using ground boom sprayers? And so then this is where we can say, again, yes or no. If we say yes, the same questions that we had for the air blast sprayers pop up, possibly with some different choices that we had compared to what's in the first column and what's in the second column. However, again, just like with the air blast sprayer questions, none of these little sub-questions say ground boom in them. The only way that you're going to remember that I'm asking about ground boom sprayers is to know that at the very top, we said, I want ground boom sprayers. When we go to the next screen, this is where it's going to ask about our post-emergent pesticide applications using air blast sprayers. So this is really the first column of what should be question 5 on the paper form, whereas here it's being labeled as question 6. This is a feature in CAPI that we cannot change as far as the numbering of the questions go. So you will need to pay very, very close attention to make sure that we are answering the question being asked, because although the questions will flow in the same order as they do on the paper questionnaire, they will not be numbered in the same order as they are on the paper questionnaire. So again, I can click yes. There is no indication within any of these sub-questions that I'm interested in air blast or air assisted sprayers. So this needs to be paid attention to in particular to make sure that you know that that's what we're working with, and we pay attention to what we've checked here at the top. On the next screen, it's the same issue. This would be the second column of question 5. In CAPI, it's been numbered question 7. Did this operation make any post-emergent pesticide applications using ground boom sprayers for pumpkins? And again, if we say yes, it will open up the table for us, and we can enter in that information about the ground boom sprayers, but we're going to just need to remember everything on this screen is tied specifically to ground boom sprayers. All right, before we go on to the next question, I want to point out a couple of interesting quirks here with these two questions that would be associated with questions 4 and 5 on the paper form that have become questions 4, 5, 6, and 7 on the CAPI form. I'm going to back up to question 6, or I guess I should probably back up to question 4, but we'll just back up to question 6 so it will be consistent with what we've been looking at here. If I look at part D asks, what is the typical nozzle used when spraying herbicide applications post-emergence? Select one item only. The order of the items in this pick list up until we get to the end is consistent with the paper questionnaire until you look at the choice for don't know versus other. On the paper form, if we look at the don't know choices, the don't know is the last choice and the other is the second to last choice. It's kind of a glitch in CAPI, or it's a restriction in CAPI, that when it's setting up these pick list choices, other always has to go last. But when they set it up on the paper form, don't know always went last. So pay specific attention when you're completing this so that you don't accidentally check the wrong box. The same goes for part H for these questions that are tied to the air blast sprayers. In part H, the last two choices in CAPI start with never and then do the other specify. Whereas on the paper form, if I look at part H, the second to last question is other, and then the third question, the last part of the question is going to be never. So again, pay close attention to make sure we don't enter those check boxes in backwards, possibly. The same issue does show up in the very next question after this. If I skip over to what would be question 6 on the paper form. Question 6, if I'm looking at part A, and it says, how often did this operation clean the systems in 2020? Again, the never and the other, please specify, are not in the same order that we see on the paper form. Here, it has never followed by other. On the paper form, it has other followed by never. Same issue in part D. You have none of the above followed by other. And on the paper form, let me go to the paper form real quick, and then we can jump down to that particular one. It has other and then none of the above here for part D. So we need to pay close attention to that we're not checking the wrong box when we're transcribing the stuff over from Capi. Now, question 6 also has one other particular issue with it that's going to cause some fits, is that if we look at the way the paper form is set up, let me skip back to the paper form for a sec. So the paper form, again, has the table set up in 2 columns. We're going to ask a few questions about spray equipment maintenance for 2020. Column 1 has to do with air blast or air-assisted sprayers. Column 2 is for ground boom sprayers. On the Capi instrument, well, they are on the same screen, but they're not next to each other in columns. What you're going to see first is all these questions about air blast sprayers, and then at the very bottom, you have this little accordion button that will allow us to look at the ground boom sprayers. It might have been easier if they had just put all of the questions on 2 separate screens like they did with questions 4 and 5, but they didn't. Be very mindful that you don't lose track of what you are entering in here. So pay attention to this top part here. For air blast sprayers and air-assisted systems, we can check off these various boxes. And then for ground boom systems, we're going to have to click the plus sign to open that up to enter that data in here. The last question where this ordering of the choices in our pick list is significantly different from what you're seeing on the paper shows up in, well, in Capi, this is labeled question 14. On the paper form, it's listed as question 13. On the paper form, what you're going to see, let me scroll down to, that's almost near the very end of the form. It's the second to last question here. It says, which of the following auditing systems, if any, did this operation participate in 2020? Check all that apply. And again, your third choice is other. Your fourth choice is that we didn't participate in an auditing system. And the fifth choice is don't know. When we go to the Capi instrument, your third choice is we didn't participate. Your fourth choice is don't know. And the fifth choice is other. Again, this is a restriction within the Capi instrument that anytime I have a choice for other, because it's got to do this, please specify in the text box that choice for other always has to come last. We don't really have a choice when it comes to that. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show here for the VCUSchem instrument. If you have any other questions, certainly feel free to contact your supervisor, or you can contact me, or you can call Paul Goings at the office or your NASDA coordinator to figure out what it is we need to do to get through this. Now, again, this is not to say that there's other things that are not wrong with this system. It'll be important that you folks let me know what is wrong so that we can bring it to the attention of our folks in headquarters so that either they can try to get this fixed for the current year's survey or perhaps get it fixed eventually for a future survey. So that's all I wanted to have here for now. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and we'll see you all soon.